Good morning. Continuing the review of the conclusion of Hemshech Ayin Beis. We are on page 1413 and began discussing, continuing the theme. So we're in the middle of Mamala Kalam and Sevav Kalam, two forms of divine energy, one that manifests and relates to existence, so it's on our terms, and one that's beyond existence, we call Lamaila. And both of them we have access to, so to speak, because neshamas, as we said, are rooted in the higher levels, so they are able to have some asaga, some comprehension, even of Seviv Klamen, as he said, the Eifen HaFlaw, the wonder of Erein Sof that's beyond existence. And they elicit two different type of emotional reactions, so to speak, in Aveda. One is, the first one elicits and generates a strong yearning and longing for manifesting that gilui within us. Amshachet, what he calls shuv. And the other elicits a rotze, a yearning and longing to be encompassed within the source. So, and one is in the shtalshlus, the other is keser, or like you call the level of the mazolis or the mazel. The next section, which we began yesterday, was the Medrash Rabbah at the word hu. This level called hu, like hu ubes dinei, hu neitles nafshecha, which is the second level of avhavtas Hashem lekecha b'chol nafshecha, siris nefesh. So this level of hu, the Medrash says that hu, there are 5 places in the Torah where hu is used in a positive way, or basically about tzaddikim, righteous people, and hu that's used in a negative way. And what does the hu represent? A certain consistency. Like he said, Lashon haflaga. I looked up, the word haflaga has several meanings, also sometimes used as a word like exaggeration, even though that's not the meaning here, but Lashon haflaga would mean that it's just that hu, when you say something hu, you're like establishing this is like a permanent feature, like when you say hu Achashverosh or hu Avraham. And he said, what is that? In Ruchni is that's the level of Ani Hashem Leish Shanisi. That is Leish Shinui from beginning to end. It's a consistency. So in Seder Ishtalshus and Mamala Kalalman, there is a structure and there's a hierarchy and there's shifts and changes and diversity. And in Seder Kalalman, the Malam Ishtalshus Leish Shanisi, Kim Lei Odamhu, the Nochem. And this is the meaning Avrom Hu Avrohom. He was a tzaddik from beginning to end. So we see here who also used in that way consistently. Blishum shinei klal. Then he continued with a few other. We'll just quickly sum up the different connections he made. This is also what it says. Echad hoya Avram echad. Echad indicates a certain seamlessness, a oneness. Echad. Besides the fact that Avram was a unique. There was only one Avram, but he himself was also one from beginning to the end. He was always a tzaddik. Then he connected to the Medrash Achasi Yenasi, that my beloved, my dove, and Tamosi, which is Avram, also connected to Achasi. And Achasi Yenasi, what is that Aveda? The Aveda L'mayla Metam V'das, again from the level of Aveda L'mayla Metam V'das. Re'usa Deliba. And that's the level of Avram, Keser Shebenefesh, which is called Hu Loshanista, the Makifim that are higher than the revealed faculties, which is like Mamala Kalam. And then he added V'gam Hu, Nikra Hu Loshanista, Al Derech with Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai. That Hu is Loshanista, meaning it's like concealed. Rabbi Yechim ben Zakkai said, I don't know which path I will be taken on. What does that mean? He didn't know. So the explanation is because he's talking about the Mahusa Neshama, that level of the soul, Keser, which is higher than awareness and consciousness. L'mayla min hadas v'asechel, lo yadaiti nafshi. And that's Rabbi Yechim Zik, and that's where he had doubt whether his Aveda was also complete on that level of Mahusa Neshama. So he was aware of the levels that he was aware of, but the levels that are super conscious beyond Yediyah, Nister, who? That was the question. And through that, Himshich was able to draw down the level of Erein Sof Seviv Kalaman, Ani Hashem Leishanisi, B'Shavah Mitchilosi Vat Blish Shinui V'Ischalkus Klal. So essentially, we're drawing from there into a world of change and hierarchy and levels. We're drawing from the higher level of Seviv Kalaman through this Aveda of the Mehusa Neshama, Etzam Neshama, what he calls Keser Sheba Neshama. Okay. And the next piece, which we're in the middle of, he now said, Yeshleimer, connecting it yet to another medrash. The medrash, Shir Ashirim on Basi Legani. Basi Legani, that the world in the beginning was Lignuni, like a bridal chamber where the Ikar Shechina was there, down on earth. But then, due to the sin, starting from the Chet Tzadas and the 7 generations subsequent, that Shechina was concealed, or he calls Histalkus HaShechina, Siluk HaShechina. Then came the 7 tzaddikim, starting with Avram Avinu, and they drew it back down with Avram doing the first step, and all the way to Moshe, who finished with building the Mishkan down on earth. Now, that Gili in the Mishkan, or in the Beis HaMikdash, he says, the Shechina Beis HaMikdash is Gili b'chinas Pnimi Shem Havaya. So that's the connection. That's why Avram is the first step in it, because you're talking about revealing a deeper level than what was there, what that was after the concealment, the Gili of B'chinas Gimel Rishenish. That's where we stopped, and we're going to continue from there. So now he's explaining what the Beis Hamikdash is, what the Mishkan is, and this obviously is going to be connected to the Hamshach of Seviv Kalalman, not just Mamal Kalalman, because Mamal Kalalman we have the Elokus, godliness is manifest in the world. The whole world was created. The world is sustained and exists because of the divine energy within existence. The Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash signified a Gili that's higher than that. Like he said, Ikar Shechina. But he's going to explain that now. That's what we began learning. And we haven't yet brought it back to connecting it to Avram. But you can start seeing the connection because Avram was the first to draw down the Shechina. So basically, we're talking here about drawing down these higher levels of Seviv Kalam into Mamala Kalam. That's where we're up to, and that's what we'll continue learning. That's a summation of what we learned yesterday, a summary. And we are 2/3 or 3/4 of the way down the line that begins Shem Havaya, and we start from Kiyadua. So he says like this again. I'm going to go back a line. The Gili HaShechina Beis HaMikdash, what does that mean, the Shechina Beis HaMikdash? How is that different than the divine that exists in all of existence? Because it's a level of Pnimi Shem Havaya, which he calls the Gili of the Bechinas Gimel Rishenis. Gimel Rishenis always means the 3 heads, the 3 first. So that's in the spheres, you have Gimel Rishenis and Zayin Tachtenis. The 3 Rishenis are the 3 first ones, and the 7 last ones. Tachtenis, 7 lower ones. So generally, the 3 first would usually be Chachma Bina Das, and the 7 lower would be Zah and Malchus, would be Chesed Gevurah Tiferes, and that's a Ched Yesod Malchus. But Gimel Rishenis often refers to Keser, Chachma Bina, you don't count Das. Here's not the place to go into that right now, but bottom line is he's saying that's the Gili of the Shechina Beis HaMikdash, which is higher than the Gili of the Kurs, like Mamalaklam, like we learned earlier about Einei HaEdah. That once you're dealing with Mides and Zah, you're really dealing with Elikus that relates to existence. You're talking Gimel Rishenis, you're talking about Elikus that's higher than existence, as shall be explained. So we'll continue there. Ukiyadua, the pages can be found at ayinbeis.com. Ukiyadua, the bias edition. So we know there were 2 Beis HaMikdash. There was the first temple, the second temple. Bias edition, Yibchinis Hei Ilah. So there's a difference between the 2 Bate Mikdashes. The first one being on a higher spiritual level, it was the Gili of B'chinas Hei Ilah. So remember, Shem Havaya, Pnimi Shem Havaya. Shem Havaya is Yud K Vav K. Hei Ilah is the first Hei. Remember earlier we talked about Yichud Shlim, the Gili of Yichud Yud K. That's the Hamshacha that comes from Seviv. Vav K is generally speaking Za and Malchus. Yud-K is either Chachma and Binah or Chachma and Binah Keser into Chachma and Binah. So he's talking about that the base bias issue was the Gili of the Hey law, Shenikra Kodesh HaKadoshim. What is the Kodesh HaKadoshim? If you read the word, Kodesh means holy. Kadoshim means holies, the holy of holies. So really there are three levels, holy and two holies. Because as soon as you say a plural, it's the minimum is two. So he says, it goes like this. Kadoshim is Chachma and Binah. The Kodesh HaKadoshim, the holy of holies, is Bechinas Keser. And we've learned this earlier as well. So Kodesh HaKadoshim, you don't just say Kodesh. You don't just say Kadoshim. You're saying Kodesh HaKadoshim. So it's the level of the three Gimel Rishenis of Kadoshim, Chacham, Binah, Kodesh, Bechinas Keser. And all this apparently is included in the Hey law. V'zeu shehimshech Avram gili b'chinas Gimel Rishenis. So this now takes us back. So what do we find from this? Since Avram was the first to start drawing down the Shechina, it's true, he didn't conclude, he didn't build a Mishkan. That wasn't until Moshe Rabbeinu, 7 generations later. But he reversed the process and began bringing the Shechina down. That means he's beginning to bring down what? The Gimel Rishenis that were there in the beginning of creation, but then were nostalgic, being removed or concealed. And Avram is being Mamshel, Gimel Rishenis. So it brings us back to what he said before, Echad Hoya Avram, the level of Leishan Yisi of Seviv Kalalman, that he mentioned earlier, which is the higher level of Keser. Hu Loshen Nister. Hu Avram. V'zeu gamken in Avram Hu Avrohom. And this is also the meaning of what we said earlier, Avram Hu Avrohom. So there he said, Avram Hu Avrohom, the Medrash said he was a tzaddik from beginning to end. But then as he explained in Echad, that it was more than that. It was a seamlessness. It was a continuousness, a certain permanence, if you wish. Avram Hu Avrohom. The Mavur b'Makim Acher, elsewhere it's explained, Shezeu Chibur b'chinas ha-Makif ha-Pnimi. Because Avram is the level of, well, I think he's going to say it, is not Avram Graham. Avram, the Alter Rebbe says, Ram, Ram. He teaches Av is Chachma and Ram as Chachma is above everything, removed like a level of Makif. I think he says there. What's the Lashon?
Seichel Hanelom
Mikol Rayan. Right. Seichel Hanelom Mikol Rayan. That's Avram. When he brings a hey is Amshacha Agilui. So it's like Avram from the Makif into the Pnimi of Avram. So in addition to what he said earlier, now we're really seeing that Avram Hu Avrohom is actually the union of Makif and Pnimi, which is essentially the union of Seviv Kalam into Mamal Kalam. Yeah, he's going to say it right afterwards. He's going to say it afterwards. So he says like this. But Inyan, who? Here's the Inyan. The Avram Hu Sheniseisav Lehei. Sheniseisav Lehei. When you say Avram, a letter Hey was added to Avram, the letter Hey. V'yadua shezeh b'chinas Hey law. It's known, this is the Hey law of Yud-Kei Vav-Kei b'chinas Binah. K'mei shekosa b'tere'er pasha lech lecha. Like he says in Tere'er and lech lecha. So it's the Hey law of Binah. If you remember Binah, we spoke about Binah earlier as well, but Binah is lower than Keser. Keser is completely nisted. Even though Binah compared to Midas, because also he called it a level of Nister, which we'll talk about, but compared to Keser, it's already a Gili. So when Avram became Avraham with a Hey, it came into the level of Gili of Binah, Hey law. The Yisun HaMayla B'zeh, and what's the quality of within this? Advantage, Shebebinah Meir B'chinas HaKeser. In Binah radiates the level of Keser. Kamaimer Hu Da Atika. Like it says, Hu Da Atika, that Binah is, Hu Da is connected to the level of Atika. Similar to what we learned earlier, that Binah is the bridge to Machshav El Yena, which he called Meiches Tima. But here he's going even higher, to Atika, to Atik. So even though Avram became with a Hey Avraham, but the Hey is not just removed. The Hey is connected to The Hey law of Binah is connected all the way to Keser, to Atik. So he's going to explain now. Binah Avram without a Hey, Hu B'chinas HaKeser, that's the level of Keser on its own. Like he says, Avram, B'chinas Seichel Anel Mekol Raya. So Av is Chochmah, but not Chochmah in a revealed way, but Ram. It's Seichel Anel Mekol Raya, which literally means a hidden Seichel from any ability to perceive. So a Seichel Nela means a hidden Seichel from anyone being able to conceive or perceive it. V'hainu, what is that level? B'chinas Chochmah shebekeser. That's Chochmah Stimach. Chochmah shebekeser, Seichel Anel Mekol Raya. Chochmah in Atzilus is Chochmah Gluya, is a revealed conscious Chochmah, wisdom. But Seichel Anel Mekol Raya is the Chochmah within Keser. That's Avram on his own. Shehi b'chinas Reimamus. That's the Ram. Ram means exalted, elevated. State of Reimamus means removed. He's above it all. Shanista v'nela min ha'elamus. It's concealed and hidden from the worlds. So that's when Avram was not yet Av Hamoin Goyim. You couldn't yet call him the father of nations. This was Avram in his own level, so on a very exalted and high level, within Chochmah shebekeser. Ayin Sham b'Teira telling us to look into the Maimer in Teira and Lech Lecha. Ubehisaf is bedrush anal, and the Hisaf is drush anal beherchev habir, with an expanded explanation to understand this. He's telling us to look in Teira, and the Hisaf is bedrush anal. In Teira itself, I believe at the back of Teira, at the end of Teira, there's Hisafis on this Maimer. He says there it's beherchev abir. Herchev means harchava, like an expanded explanation. Okay. So that is Avram before he became Avraham. There's no connection yet, or it's not revealed yet in the lower worlds. Ushanikra Avram, and when he was called Avram, the name was changed, when they added a hey. This was the chiddush, that level of Avram, which until now was removed and hidden, who should come down in a revealed way, in a pnimiistic way, internally. And that's why Avram is being mamshech begimel Roshen, is bringing the Shechina back to earth, not in order to remain removed. V'zehu. And that's what the Medrash says, the Psik says, Avrom Hu Avrohom. So what is the meaning of it? So the simple pshat, and when you learn the literal meaning, is the saying that this Avram is this Avram, and the Medrash says he's a tzaddik throughout. But now it's a deeper touch. Avrom Hu Avrohom means, Shezeu Achibur, that Avram, within Chochmah shebekeser, Hu Avram, he's the Hu. That Hu of Lashon Nister is coming into Avram, B'chinas Makif, the chibur of the level of Makif, Shezeu B'chinas Hu, B'chinas Helam, Sheyer B'Pnimius B'chinas Gilui. That it should radiate in the Pnimius and illuminate in the Pnimius and the level of Gilui, in the Hay of Avraham, which is already Binah and revealed in Atzilus. So that's Avram Hu Avrohom. The chibur of Makif and the Pnimi, of these two levels that we've been discussing. I'll just do more 2 lines and then we'll stop for questions. The parenthesis he adds, Hugam Kenin Bechinas Yichud Yudke. Remember, before he was associating that with Yichud Yudke, but there he was talking about the Amshach of the Makif alone. But now he's explaining that the Amshach of the Makif means you're revealing it. This is the Yichud of Yudke, Bechinas Yichud Shlim. Like we learned, a total, complete union. Shezeo Bechinas Mazla Dafka. This comes dafka with the power of the mazel, not schus mazel from Keser, shenimshech mebchinas haKeser, which is drawn from the level of Keser. V'zeu gamken inyan kedesh hakadoshim. This is also the union of kedesh hakadoshim, because it's the yichud of kedesh and kadoshim, which is Keser and Chachma and Binah. Keser is Kodesh, and HaKadoshim is, like we said, Chachma and Bin. So you have here a bridge between the two, a joining of the two, and that is essentially what Avram did, and that was why he began the Hamshach of the Shechina after it was nostalgic, after it was concealed in the earlier generation. Okay. So that ends the page and the paragraph, I see. But there's more. He's going to discuss further this whole concept. Let me stop here, and for any questions or clarification, anything that needs to be elaborated on. Okay.
Well, excuse me, isn't Yechud Shlim, I thought it was Yud K and Vav K together, but I guess there's another Yechud Shlim, which is just Yud K?
He's not talking about Vav K here at all. He's just talking Yechud Shlim. He calls is Yechud Yud K.
How could both of them be Shlim?
Where does it say Vav K is Shlim?
Well, we said before Baruch Shomar, Yechud Shlim.
First of all, the Yechud Shlim simply means a total union. It doesn't tell you what levels it's uniting. It could be on many different levels. You could have the connection of Yud K and Vav K. You could have the connection of Vav K itself. You have the connection of Yud K itself.
And they're each individually considered their own Shlim.
Well, Yechud Shlim simply means a complete union versus a incomplete one. So every level of Yichud can have both possibilities.
And here we're learning that Avraham had both Binah and Chachma from the Keser, and that was the Yechud Shlim, the internal and the external.
Well, Yichud Shlim first is Yud K. Let's start with that. Yud and Hey. Yud Hey often is Chachma and Binah. Here it sounds like the Hey seems to be maybe Chachma and Binah, and the Yud is Keser. He doesn't say explicitly. He just says that this level of the Yichud of the Makif of Keser with basically Binah, or maybe Chachma and Binah, Kodesh Kadoshim, is Yichud Yud K. That's all he says. He doesn't say exactly whether the Yud is Keser. It sounds like that the Yud would be Keser and the Hey would be Chachma and Binah, but on the other hand, he says the Hey is Binah. So I don't know if we can really definitively say which is which level, but overall, it's the Yichud of the three Gimel Rishenis. That's clear. Yeah.
Just to for review purposes, the notion that the Hey is Bina, which is able to be Mamshich the Yud of Keser, the notion that we can use our minds to contemplate something that is even transcends thought, that transcends that is, yeah, that's the best way to put it. That the mind can actually think about something that transcends its own experience, and you need that contemplation in order to have a hamshacha from Keser or from the Sovev or Makif into the Mamala. Is that a fair restatement of what we learned, let's say, in the past few days, or is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, what did you add? What was the main thing you emphasized?
I didn't add anything. I wanted to make sure I understood why Hey represents Bina in this. I don't want to call it a formula, but in this explanation. What did it mean to add Hey to the name of Avraham? Because he was able to bring Keser into the Makif into
Pnimis, yes.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. That's correct.
The function. Okay. All right.
And it also goes back, if you really go back to page 1411, when he started the whole topic, he brought the Emek HaMelech, which seems to be a big foundational text that relates to all of this. So he said, Aliyah through Bina, if you recall. He said, B'chol nafshecha, Lashonishta is Bina, Alma Diskasya, Bina, Neitelis, Neshama Sadikim, elevates them to Machshavi Elyein Mechus Tima, yeah, which is Keser. Yeah. And the Aliyah, Bina, he said, because Bina is the level of, here he explains it as B'chol nafshecha, earlier it was B'chol Meidecha, the level that unites, is Chabrus Elyon V'tachten. If you go back to the beginning of the paragraph on 1411.
Yeah, that's what I'm referring to. Yeah.
And there he also says that the Heichel Kodesh Kadoshim, he also brings the Holy of Holies. Shezeu iskashus v'ischabrus da'tachten ba'elyon.
Nice.
Zeu b'chinas merkava.
He
So
brought
it
it
all,
even there too.
it ties all together that it's the binding and the connection between the higher and the lower and the higher, in the higher, which is like a merkava, and also the hamshachah. So it's both aliyah and hamshachah.
Oh, it's an aliyah. It's also an aliyah. What's the aliyah of hay into Keser to bring down Keser?
Yeah.
What? Okay.
Well, it's an aliyah.
It's to
And
bring
then it
the
also brings
dollars
it
of
down.
It's a rutz of a shuv. That's we talked about that too.
Well, not exactly, because he said that Binah was primarily rotzai, which is being encompassed in the source. But apparently, especially now, Avrom Hu Avrohom, clearly we're being encompassed in the source, but we're also bringing it down. So there is both elements.
Yeah, exactly.
The hay brings
Beautiful.
the hay brings the seichel and ne'elam into gilui, right? That's what the function of the.
Correct. The chachma shebekesser into chachma bina in the gilui. Yeah, correct. So that's why I keep going back to Yechud Shlim, because that's what the Emek HaMelech said. At the end of the Emek HaMelech, the language was, if you recall, back on 1411, he said like this. After the parentheses, he said, by the halah zu, through this halah of Bina into Keser, mamshichim sheyi yichud yudke Yechud Shlim. Your mamshich, there should be the yichud of yudke, a total union. And if you recall, earlier, on bottom of page 1410, if you remember the gazing, that ultimately when Binah, after it finishes its work with the Mides, where it's aim, revetzes ala frechim, it's nurturing the Mides, the emotions, then it gets propelled, including by the emotions, to join Chochmah, to gaze at and be gazed at by Arich. Istaklusa da Arich Hampim beChochmah Bina bezun, which he also called Zivuga Shlim there. Zivuga Deloy Shalim on the bottom of 1410, he called a union that's not complete. That's the Chayas, the divine energy within existence. That's like Mamala Kalam. Zivuga Shalim, he said, is the birth of Neshamas, which is the purpose of existence. Lahel Neshamas Pnimi ve'atzmus HaChochmah, from the Istaklus of Arich Ampin into Chochmah Bina and to Zun. So the union is complete, as he said there in the bottom of the 1410, he's talking about Ishin Einai, the pupil of the eye.
Arich Ampin here is referring to Hashem.
Arich Ampin?
Are we talking about Zachar and Nekeva plus Hashem? I mean, there was all Hashem.
Everything is Hashem. We're talking about which levels. Keser or Chachma, yeah. Okay. So we'll continue. Page 1414, next page. Yeshlemer, other Yeshlemer. Echad Hu Avrohom. So he's going back to Echad Hu Avrohom. Remember Echad Hu Avrohom? Interesting. 1 second. I want to just see something. The expression is actually Echad Haya Avrohom. Now he's saying Echad Hu Avrohom, which I think maybe he's hinting that Haya Hu, the level of Hu. I think I even discussed it the first time we learned it, now that I recall. Echad Hu Avrohom, Hainu Sha'er Kameshu Be'etzem, Keinu B'chinas Hagili. So the publisher here made it a new paragraph. It sounds to me like it's a continuation of the previous line, but regardless, he's now teaching Echad Hu Avrohom, like Avrom Hu Avrohom. So Echad, like I said, Hu Avrohom, you could. The simple meaning is that Avrom was unique. There was only one Avrom, Echad Avrom. No one like Avrom. Is a unique, exclusive type of individual. But here he's teaching Echad like from Yonosi, an Achdus. He's talking about an Achdus, an interface, a union between higher and lower. That's Echad Hu Avrom, like Avrom Hu Avrohom. Sha'eh Kameshu Be'etzem. The way it's in the Etzem, which apparently talking here about Sevav Kalalman, Keinu B'chinas Hagili. So generally speaking, from the Etzem to Gili goes through gradations and goes through Tzimtzumim and concealments. But Avram bridged that by drawing from the Etzem into Gili, which is a very big part of the whole Kavanah here. Because the way creation was created, we're not talking about Ikar Shechina B'Tachtenim. Creation was created, Bereshis Bara Lakim, God created the world with Asara Mamaris, That's Mamalakalam. That's the Kav that follows the Tzimtzum, and it creates the diversity of existence. Each level has its divine energy, like we learned at length of Mamalakalam, commensurate to and proportionate and tailored to each part of creation. Then comes a neshama, comes down of Vayipar Ba'apav Nishmas, the creation of a human being. It's Tselem Elokim. And Vayipar Ba'apav Nishmas Chaim, the neshama comes into a body, and the neshama is rooted in levels that are higher than the tzimtzum. So the neshama now, through its Havaya, begins to draw down, not just reveal the Elokus and Mamalakal Alman that is there within existence, not just the artist within the art, but starting to draw down the artist as he's beyond the art, Seviv Kalam. And that is Hamshachos HaEtzem and Chinas HaGili. And who began that process? That was Avram. That's what he did. Till him, there was the concealments as a result of the sins and transgressions. And Avram began this process. So he's teaching Echadei Avram, this Achdus. Ulefizeh. And based on this, Avrom Hu Avrohom takes on a whole new level of meaning. And that is, Lefizeh Avrom Hu Avrohom, who Ke'inyan is going to introduce now another topic, which I'll explain in a moment. Moshe le Psik Taama Benayu. So there's a Zohar that says that there are times in the Torah you say twice the name, Moshe is mentioned twice, one after the other. Moshe, I think in Parsha Shmos or Ve'era, and the Zohar says that there's no Psik Taama. Psik Taama is like a line, like a hyphen between them. There's no hyphen between it. By Avram, also twice, Avram, it says twice in Vayera, and there it says there's a Psik Taama. Psik Taama again is like a line that considers like a separation between them. So the Zohar is talking about the Ruchni is that Moshe, as he was above, that's how he was below. Avram, not necessarily. But now the Rebbe Rashab is saying, based on what we're learning here, we see that Avram also has an element of consistency from as he was above, that's how he is below. Avrom Hu Avrohom. As he's in Keser, that's how he comes into Gilui and Pnimi, into Chachma and Binah, into Atzilus. So he says like that, the B'chinas Moshe will soon discuss. So what does the Zohar mean that Avram does have a Psik Taama? I think he addresses it here. If not, I'll address it. I remember talking about this at length when we learned it the first time. But he's interestingly, just to drive the point home, in Tavshim Mem Zayin, 1987, is Pasha Mishpatim. That was usually when the Rebbe would speak. That was the anniversary when they began to learn Tanya on the radio, which I have now continued that custom. I teach Tanya every Saturday night, which say Shabbos. So Rabbi Weinberg would teach Tanya on the radio. So every year, Mishpatim, which was around the anniversary when it began, the Rebbe would speak about it. Almost every year. Probably every year as well. So that year, it was a fascinating talk the Rebbe gave, which then was edited and published, a very powerful talk, where the Rebbe added a whole piece in his own handwriting. I prepared that sikha. And the Rebbe compared technology and specifically radio, television, but all technology really, to Moshe le Psik Taama. Lahavdil, obviously. Why? Because technology, what does technology do, the Rebbe said? It eliminates the distance between time and space. Without technology, if you want to reach somebody, you had to travel there. Or even if you sent mail, it took time. Same thing with space. Spaces were apart. Technology, you could be one place, another person another place, and generally it would take a long time for one to reach the other. And in a split second, it bridges that. So the Rebbe explains there at length, a beautiful sikha about Hishtalshlus and Lamayla Mishtalshlus. That Hishtalshlus is structured in that way, everything has its location and has its time. So there's yesterday, today, and tomorrow, past, present, future. In space, there's higher and there's lower and there's different places, and there could be thousands, if not millions or billions of miles apart. And then there's a power God invested in creation called technology, which we have tapped and called technology, a power that can bridge these differences, time and space, in like that. And he says that's similar, Moshe le Psik Taama, So the Alter Rebbe says in Likutei Torah that when Moshe spoke to Parei in Mitzrayim, Erves Haaretz, in the most profane and decadent of lands, it was Moshe of Atzilus speaking to Parei. That's the Alter Rebbe's expression. It wasn't like Atzilus went through Bria and Yitzira and Asiya and Tzimtzumim. Moshe, as he was in Atzilus, was speaking to Parei as he was on earth, and not just on earth, in the lowest part of earth. Talking about spiritually speaking. So that's Moshe's power to so-called like bypass the usual structures and parsayos, partitions and curtains and all the different partitions that exist in Ishtalshlus and just leap beyond that. So when reading this, it brings me back to that sikha because the Rebbe literally compared it to technology. He did. He gave that example. So he's saying now, based on this, Echad Avram, that he's made the etzem, the way it's begili, so therefore, lefizeh Avrom Hu Avrohom is like Moshe le Psik Taama beinayhu. There's no separation between them. The becomes Moshe k'Moshe b'Atzilus, because Moshe, as he is in Atzilus, kenu gam b'Bria. That's how he is in Bria, without a diminishment. K'Moshe kosa b'Teireh ba'abir deve'ela mishpatim. Like he explains, like he discusses in Teireh in the Maimer, in the explanation, the explanation of Ela Mishpatim. Now he's going to qualify. Now he's going to say, but what about the Zohar says there is a Psik Taama by Avram? So how can you equate the two? But let me stop for a moment, make sure everybody got the point we just learned. If not, or if you have any questions, I'll be happy to explain before we continue.
What is the reference to, let's see, Moshe, Avram, it was, one second, Hu Echad, Echad Haya Avraham.
Right.
Yeah, it's a pasuk from Yecheskel, but if you look
I
at
already,
that,
and I explained at length that there's the simple interpretation, there's the Chassidic interpretation.
Okay, fine, thank you.
There's the Medrash explanation as well. So on the previous page, he compared it to Achasi Yoinosi, that this is the Achdus, L'mayla Metam V'das. But now he's going further. It's not just L'mayla Metam V'das, it's bringing that Achas or Echad down into Shtalshlus. That's what he's saying now.
So what does it mean, the psik? He said the psik is not lahafsik, no, it's
There's
a
no Psik
continuation.
Taama by Moshe Rabbeinu.
Avram.
So he's now going to qualify. He's going to ask that question right now. So he continues now, says like this. V'agam da Avram Psik Taama. As I explained before, by Moshe, there's no hyphen. There's no, I don't know if the word hyphen is the right word. What is the hyphen? Is a dash. When you make a line like this, basically like a partition.
Slash? A slash?
Slash. The thing is, a slash is usually a diagonal, no?
Oh,
But it's
yeah.
it's like a straight slash. I mean, you have it on.
It's
a
more
keyboard.
it's like a break.
Right. You have it on a keyboard. It's like a straight line, like a slash, but like a straight line between two words.
You have it in davening also.
Yeah, of course.
Hashem Shamayim also.
Yeah. The thing is that I don't know if there's a word. Is there a word in English for that symbol? Maybe there is. Whatever. But by Avram, it is Psik Taama K'Moshe Koser Sham, like it says there. He's referring to Teireh, but it's a Zohar. So how are you saying Avram is like Moshe? There's a distinction. Avram does have a Psik Taama. B'kol Mokim Yesh Leimer, it's the Rebbe Rashab's Chiddush. He says, nevertheless, you can say that Psik Hu Gam Ke Mechaber. Yes, there is a Psik, so you have to say there's some distinction to Moshe. But in this case, this so-called partition, this line, is also a joiner. It's joining them. U'kamoi bebeis shemes Havaya the kodim yud gimel midas aras kodim yud gimel midas the Psik Taama begavayu. So we know it says Hashem Hashem Kel Mochel Mole Rachminu. The whole Yud Gimel Midas Arachim begins with twice the name Yud Ke Vav Ke. Hashem Hashem, Havaya Havaya, and there's a Psik Taama Big Havayu. Big Havayu means between them. So there it's explained that Psik is meant to join them, not to separate them. So he's saying Yesh Lemer, even though it does say in the Zohar, it says in Teira'er that Avram has a Psik. Nevertheless, he says you could say that Psik comes to join, not to separate. So you have to say, based on this, well, let me see how he continues. But it sounds to me that ultimately Avram and Moshe are not exactly the same level, obviously, but there's something similar. And he's bringing and saying here that Avram has an element like Moshe. Remember, at the end of the day, Avram just was mamshich the Shechina to the first heaven, the seventh heaven, to the sixth heaven. And Moshe brought it down with Shechanti b'seichem. So there's something that Moshe has that Avram did not have. But on the other hand, there is something similar, and that's what he's emphasizing here. The Psik gamki mechaber, like the Psik between the two, between names of Havaya in the beginning of the Yud Gimel Midas Harachamim. The Chen beKrishma, we also find it in Krishma. Shenemer Beis Shemus Havaya, she says Shema Yisrael Hashem, right? Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So Havaya is said twice. And in between there's an Elokeinu. Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. So there's Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. The Elokeinu be'emtza. And Elokeinu is written between the two Hashem Havayas. So it serves like a bridge. So is it a separator or is it a connector? Is it a divider or a connector? So we learn that it has an element that it divides, but it also has an element that connects the two. As a matter of fact, earlier in Ayin Beis, in volume 2, he spoke about the Hashem Elokeinu Hashem in Shema, which of course is a very important theme here, but especially in the Maimer HaMagbiel L'Sheves, where Shema is the contemplation that brings the Yichud of Elokus down into the animal soul, V'ahavta. But that's for later. But he's bringing it here. Through the 13 attributes of compassion, is through the Yud Gimel you're having a chibur. That's the whole point. That when God revealed his 13 attributes of mercy, of compassion to Moshe, in Parshat Keser, by when he was praying for the Jews for forgiveness, it wasn't to separate, it was to unite. It was to bring from the highest levels of compassion, of tshuva, highest levels of compassion into existence to help forgive the Jews. So the whole idea of the Yud Gimel Sarachim is a chibud. And though this says, therefore, even though there's a Psik, Taama begavaya between the two Havayas, the whole point is mischabrim beis Hashemis, to join the two names, the Havaya the higher and the Havaya lower. Shezeh inyan vayikra Havaya Havaya. That's what it says. It begins vayikra called Havaya Havaya. B'chinas kriya v'hamshachim m'shem Havaya Aleph l'shem Havaya Beis. So he's teaching vayikra that God called out kriya. What's kriya? When you call out and you pronounce something, you're being mamshich. So he's saying, what's the hamshach here? That he's being mamshich, a kriya v'hamshach from the first Havaya, which is like the higher Havaya, like from Seviv Kalman, to the second Havaya, which is the Havaya that relates more to existence. And like he says now, like it's explained elsewhere, the Beis Shemus Havaya and Shem Havaya de Le'elo, the two names of Havaya, Vayikra Havaya Havaya, the Yud Gimel Midas Harachimim, are the higher Havaya, the Shem Havaya de Latata. So I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Chassidus talks a lot about two levels of Shem Havaya. In Havaya itself, there's Havaya de La'ela, a higher level, and a lower level, which correspond, like he says, the B'Shosham, B'chinas Shem Havaya de La'ela, Hu B'chinas Erein Sof Shalifnei HaTzimtzum. In their root, the higher Havaya is the Erein Sof Pre-Tzimtzum. B'chinas Shmei HaGadol Ad Shalei Nivra Ela. That's the Shmei HaGadol that we say, Ad Shalei Nivra Elam Hayahu U'Shmei Bilvad. What's Shmei? Shmei Havaya Havaya de La'ela. Hayahu Shmei Levad, right? Actually, even Hayahu Shmei Levad, Shazel Shem Havaya. The commission is Bar Le'il. That's the name Shmei Shem Havaya, like I explained earlier. The Shem Havaya de Latata. Hu B'chinas Hakav Hanimshech Me'erein Sof La'achar Ad Simtzum. So in general terms, it's the level of the kav, which we know is the root of mamala kol almin, that is transmitted and extends from the Eid Ein Sof after the tzimtzum. So the kav in general is mamala kol almin. That refers to Havaya dilatata. So you say vayikra Havaya Havaya, you're saying that God is being mamshech from the Eid Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. In our context, like Sevav Kalman, into the Kav, Shem Havaya Dilatato, after the Tzimtzum, in Mamala Kalam.
Rashi is saying about Havaya Havaya, Midas Rachamim hi achas koidim sheyachto ve'achas la'achar sheyachto v'yoshuv. So you could see similarity.
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. So then what's the Psik Taama between the two Havayas? So he says, by a Psik Taama begavayu, the Psik Taama, the line, the separation between the two Havayas, what is that? That's the tzimtzum amokim pone. That's the concealment and the space that it created. So there you have it. Havaya, Eid Ein Sof before the tzimtzum. Then comes the Psik Taama or Elokeinu in Shema, which is tzimtzum. And then comes the kav. And then when you say Havaya Havaya, you're saying that though there's a Psik Taama, nevertheless the Hamshach is coming from the higher Havaya into the Havaya. It's like overriding, so-called, this partition called the Tzimtzum. By the Yud Gimel Sarachmim. This is what he concludes now. And through the 13 attributes of compassion, V'chein de Krishma, and through Hashem Elokeinu Hashem, in Krishma, Nase Ischabras Beis Hashemis Al Yidei Psik Taama. So the Psik Taama initially come to separate when you create existence. But when you're drawing down Yud Gimel Midas Harachmim and Shema, which is the Aveda Sa'odam, that, so to speak, is able to override that Psik to create that you can connect the two Shemis. So the Psik Taama then becomes a connector, joining them rather than a separator. So initially it separates, that's the tzimtzum, that's how creation is created. That's mamala kalam. But then comes Sevav Kalam, which remains above. But then through the Aveda of Avram, and the same thing with the Aveda of Moshe on a deeper level perhaps, and the same thing like he's saying now through Gimel Sarachmim and Shema, that creates, there should be a joining between these two levels that initially were two separate levels. Yeah, and now he's going to explain that in more detail. But here we'll stop here. He's going to say Va'inyan Hu. And again, I see here the first time we learned it. I think if I recall correctly, I don't know if I personally fully appreciate it, but I see now that this is very, very directly connected to the whole theme of interface in the most direct way, and to the two levels of ultimately Ishin, Einai, and Ayin, or the Ayin as it is in the vessel, in the Eris and Kalim, and the Ayin, the eye, the vision from the Etzem Koyach Hariyah. And that ultimately it's about joining them, even though we have to obviously go through these levels before we join them. We have to first see them as separate levels. But that's where he's going with this. Very, very good. Okay.
How will you explain Moshe now? Loi Psik.
Well, being that Moshe comes after Matan Torah and after Yetzias Mitzrayim and the building of the Mishkan, you have to say that there was even a deeper, the Bitla HaGzeira ben Elyenim v'Tachtenim. By Avram, there was still a Gzeira ben Elyenim v'Tachtenim. So I don't think you could say that complete seamlessness. I mean, just forget about this Maimer. Just the Chassidus, the Chiddush of total joining together really happens after Matan Torah and the Mishkan, the Beis HaMikdash. Avram began the process, which is what he's saying here from the Medrash Shir HaShirim. So I would say by Moshe, there's it probably breaches the tzimtzum even deeper than Avram does. He doesn't go into it here, but you can explain the difference because also L'Asad Love, we know then the tzimtzum atzma yoyer. You can have a level where altogether everything is like a seamless oneness. So I think it's levels on the level of the unity that's being introduced. Before Avram, there was Pirud. Because of the Chatoim that created a Siluk Shechina, Avram began bringing Achdus Echad Avram into the world, and that was the beginning. And between Avram itself, Avrom Hu Avrohom, So Avram also has stages. How he's beyond, like Seviv, Keser, Avram, and then he becomes Avram and he brings that in the Gili. And then each of the generations, ultimately to Moshe, it just intensifies. So you have to ultimately explain that regardless, because you can't say Avram and Moshe are exactly the same level. This is after Matan Torah, this is the Mishkan, this is, many things happen since. I said, bit like Zeta and so on. And
It's
then, of
like
course,
Mashiach.
this is also how it will play itself out through this thousands of years, by Yisrishin, by Yisheni, and ultimately, in the Geula, with Mashiach's coming, you have a whole nother level of not just Edison, but Nesuyin. Remember also Matan Torah, Yem Chasonosei Zeh Matan Torah, but it's still Edison. Losed Love and Nesuyin will be the complete joining. It's just a matter of so it really comes down to different levels of Achdus.
It's interesting that before Avraham, there was Siluk until Loki Ashvi. What was Kivyachol Hashem's plan then? He wanted to destroy the world?
Well, he did with the Mabul. The Mabul destroyed the world, and then he purified it and prepared it. It was Matayat as well, purified. And I mean, that's in general a question. What does it mean that God created the world? Then Chamtim Ki Asisim, and then the Noach and the Teva, and then all the generations. Essentially, this is a bigger topic. It's not for right now. About that, initially God created the world. Elam HaMiluya Nivra, gave free will, and they sinned, and the divine was concealed. The world and Elokus are at a fundamental state of tension because they're so antithetical. And that tension played itself out. It's similar to Shviras HaKelim. What did Hashem's intention was with Shviras HaKelim? He knew afterwards there'd be a tikkun, because initially you have to experience the tension between matter and spirit before you're able to join them together. And that's, as I said, a bigger topic. So the earlier generations were exactly that. They were Chovov Dedes Nizunin Mechazdish Al Kodesh Baruch Hu, the Gemara says, first 26 generations. So it was a certain Hamshach Hamaylamata, but it wasn't the Birur Hamata so much. Avram began that, but he only began. And by Matan Torah, especially after Yetzias Mitzrayim, that's when the Mata and the Tachton and the Elyon really joined. So it's stages. It's like, think of chinuch. Educating a child is before Matan Torah, and Matan Torah Mitzvah Ve'esa is when it becomes formalized. But Avram is a critical piece because he is coming from a pagan world, and he's introducing Elikus as a pioneer, Echadai Avram, because he was the first to really discover God, so to speak, and bring God into a world of transgression and sin, and it's begin the transformation. That Rizal says that the Yichud of Matan Torah began with Avram Avinu, but it wasn't obviously the full Yichud at the time. Okay. We're not finished yet. This is much more to go here with this topic. This next page, the next half a page. But we're making it through, so good. Are there any other questions, or we stop here?
Just to go back briefly, is there a portion in the Chumash, in the scroll itself, where there's a Psik Taama between Avraham and Avraham?
I believe there is. I have to look, but I think there is, and that's why it says Psik Taama, yeah.
Because I was just trying to find it and post it, and then Moshe, there is no Psik Taama, so I was just trying to find it.
I have to look. Did you look at the end of Vayera? Anyway, I'll look. If I find it, I'll
okay. Yeah, I'm not sure I looked there. I'm doing word searches, so it's not so simple in Safari. Anyways, I don't want to distract the class.
Yeah. So let's stop here. We'll stop here by Inyan. It's going to explain this on page 14. We're on page 1414. Let me stop.